Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first SASB seminar series for 2025. So we started planning this a while ago, and we managed to find a slot that suits everyone. And we're very lucky with three very esteemed speakers to speak to us today. And I think this is a great way to start this year. This session is titled Enabling Regenerative Design Thinking in Our Cities and Spaces and Moving from Theory to Practice. And I think as we transition towards becoming a global population, our city presents to us new opportunities to create new living environments that transcends from purely sustainable places to survive within, to regenerative places and societies which present hope to future generations. And I've picked up the concept of thriving, an opportunity in a number of the abstracts from our speakers, and dealing with this is such an important issue to also tackle. Although much has been written about the topic, implementing regenerative thinking strategies in our cities requires intentional and alternative modes of practice. And hopefully in this seminar that crosses a number of scales and a number of different approaches and practices, we can explore this and see where this will take us in the end. We're very lucky today to have three speakers today. We've got Professor Rob Rochma, who is from the technology from Monterrey in Mexico. And then we also have Prof. Stefan Niehaus from TU Delft in the Netherlands, and then Professor Carina Landman from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. And thank you very much for being willing to share your work and also speaking to all of us. And we're really looking forward to the presentations today. Before I'm going to start, I'm going to ask that Jeremy Gibbert, Professor Jeremy Gibbert, start with just a quick introduction regarding SASB, what the seminars that we're planning, and then also what other aspects we've got planned for this working group. But Jeremy, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Hugo, Jan, and welcome to this seminar. It should be very exciting. Basically, what I would like to do is give you a quick introduction. So W116 is a working group, Smart and Sustainable Built Environments of the CIB. And many research organizations, universities with built environments are members. And if you're interested, please find out more and join the group. We run a whole range of different initiatives for members. One of the exciting initiatives is the SASB conference series. We had a very good one in New Zealand last year. We're planning already the next two. So the next SASB 2025 will be in Lille in France, between the 3rd and the 5th of November. Please look out for it. You can still submit abstracts. And then we're already planning SASB 2026, probably in Cambridge in the UK, June 2026. So those are the conferences planned, and we're doing this in conjunction with the SASB Journal. So a lot of the papers find their way into a number of different journals. So if you're looking for publications, it's a very good route is to get your paper in and then ideally develop that up into a journal article. So also look out for the SASB Journal. We have many special editions. Please submit your articles for that. And really kind of finally, my request is please contact Jan, contact me if you've got any ideas for the SASB seminar series. The idea behind it is really exciting new ideas to stimulate discussion, interactive joint research projects that people can embark on. So thanks, Jan. That's me.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Yes, this is such an exciting working group to be part of, and I appreciate it. Good. So as we're planning today, we've got three presentations from Rob, Stefan, and Karina. And what I would like you to do is please note your questions and comments or aspects you'd like to delve deeper into. And you're welcome to, in the chat, post those questions. And what we'll do afterwards is, after the presentations, we'll allow for a discussion session, which I hope that we can really explore some of the themes further that's being presented today. So please note those questions, and you can also type them in and send them in. In the meantime, I'll keep track of them. Good. So our first speaker today is Professor Rob Rochema. And before I introduce you, Rob, let me just make sure that you can share your presentation and we can see it, and then I'll introduce you. So Rob, if you look at the top, yes, you got it there. We can see the screen. It's not in presenter mode. If you wanted to put it into presenter mode.
There you go.
There, yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you, and we can hear you as well. Good. Professor Rob Rochema is faculty of the Excellence Professor of Regenerative Culture at Tecnologio de Monterrey in Monterrey, Mexico, and the director or founder of the Citadial Office for Adaptive Design and Planning. He's one of the lead authors of Architecture, Urban Design and Planning chapter of the third assessment report of the UCCRN. That's the Urban Climate Change Research Network. He's a landscape architect, an internationally renowned design expert on sustainable urbanism, climate change adaptation, nature-driven design, and urban agriculture. He's held several professorships positions in Mexico, the Netherlands, Australia, as well as visiting professorships in the Northern Ireland, Australia, and Japan, and has written multiple books on nature and landscape-driven planning and design of landscapes and cities, and is a series author of a contemporary urban design thinking. Rob also has a lot more that he's done over the years, so we're really lucky to have him here. And Rob, I'm really looking forward to your presentation on regenerative regions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you for inviting me to this exciting panel, and I think it's very timely because we are, facing lots of trouble worldwide that we can, tackle probably by using a somewhat different perspective than we used to in our daily practices. So thank you again, and also thank you, Jeremy, for, keeping SASBA and the SASBA working group up to speed, because I have been part of it for a while, but it's a long time ago, and it's very good to see it's still alive and it's still working globally. So I will make a note of the dates, although 2026 is during the World Cup. I'm not sure whether that is planned consciously, but let me see whether I can make it one of the next times again. So thank you again, and I'd like to start with something that is probably for everyone. Really, everyone knows this already, and I mean those maps that you see around is wherever you are in the world, no matter whether you're Europe, Africa, Mexico, Latin America, East Asia, all of those maps, they color really red, and that's concerning. And what we need to do at a global level doesn't go fast enough, I guess, but it's something we should keep in mind, and this is something that I think everyone is really if you follow the news, you have seen those images, and one of my things that I always think, that how is it possible that we look at this, but 3 years ago it was in the same place, exactly the same. 5 years ago it was in the same place, exactly the same. So Are we learning anything of these kind of events, or are we still, ostriches and keeping our heads down and pretend there's nothing going on? It's not only fire, and very recently, this is an image of the Santa Catarina River in Monterrey, and Monterrey is a very dry city. It is has knows years of extreme drought. Water scarcity is a big problem. You will say, well, why this picture? This is happening. This was happening last year in June. A tropical storm hit, the Gulf of Mexico and entered the region of Monterrey with large floodings as a result of that. That happens once every 10 years, 12 years. And predictions say, well, it could happen more often. Intensity can rise. And although it causes lots of problems, it also is very beneficial to the regions, because after this, most of the dams are full of drinking water again. So people are happy, but also afraid of this kind of climatic events. So where do we come from? I think for 10,000s of years, we have been in the Holocene, in which human beings were just, guided by nature. Nature, tells us how we can live and how we can, and what we need to do. We are very, small compared to the enormous landscapes that are around us. And a familiar way of looking at it at the moment is that human beings, they start ruling over nature. So we interfere with our geological time and our landscapes around us in the Anthropocene. So what shall we do? We should probably change that behavior, but it's not easy, of course. And this is an attempt to think differently and create a new geological era called the Symbiocene. Glenn Albrecht, a professor from Sydney, Australia, he coined this concept of the Symbiocene, which brings nature and human beings back in balance again, and develop a symbiosis between the two. Because if we are doing nothing and we just stay in our own homes, the world around us will change, and we feel kind of homesick in our own house, because the landscape is changed because of climate change, because of anthropocenic interventions in our landscapes around us. And Albrecht calls it solastalgia. It's the feeling of being homesick while you're still in your same house, in the same place, but your environment has changed quite rapidly. So what would the symbiotic landscape look like? This is the next geological time in our history. Can we develop a way of living together and in balance with our environment and nature around us? Can we connect and interconnect with the places that we are inhabiting as human beings? And one of the things that we think is that it's not only a very small scale thing that it's also not the global scale, because we see that in all the COPs in different places, people do very good work, but the impact of it is relatively small so far. So maybe there is in between, there is this concept of the regenerative region that we have to look at, an urban landscape combination at a scale of, let's say, tens of kilometers in both ways. So regenerative regions could be something that we need to look at much more than we do so far. And I will talk about Monterrey for a bit, because we developed a plan or a strategy for the region here in Monterrey, taking the landscape as the first starting point of our thinking. This is how it looks like at the moment. It's like 5.5 million people. It's like it's in a beautiful environment, large mountains around it, a huge valley in which the city has been growing over the last decades. It's relatively close to the US border, which I don't know if it's an advantage at the moment, but I don't think so, actually. But it's also dominated by the philosophy of the US. This is how it looks like. It's an amazing landscape. Mountains up to 2,500 meters, a little bit higher sometimes. And in the valley, you can see the city creeping up those mountains and filling up the valley with all negative consequences also of this. So sometimes it's super dry. This is the same river as I showed before. It's for years it can rain almost nothing in this region. So it's super dry, but as I showed before, it's also at the same time super wet. And the problem we need to face in a way that we need to make decisions and also plans for the future that are taking that into account. So the people in Monterey, they are called regios. They have structurally less green than similar metropolises around the world. Less green means hotter days and less capacity to be resilient. And that has not always been the case, because in this same area, descriptions out of the history in the early 17th century, they describe this region as abundant, a lot of water, a lot of nature, wildlife, a lot of trees, etc. So it's not the case that it has always been very dry and desert-like. So there's only 4 square meter green space per person. And the World Health Organization advises almost more than double of that. So we are a little bit short, people are short of green space around that. And when we take into account the 330-300 rule of Cecile Konijnendijk, he started to think about green spaces in the city. You need to have like 30% tree cover or more in cities. And in this case, we only have half of the city that meets that demand. The other analysis is that you can see that in the city center, where there is no or hardly any vegetation, the urban heat island is profound, but also the precipitation is less than in other areas. So there is also a correlation between green space, trees, nature, and the amount of rainfall that is happening in the city. So this city is suffering relatively much more than other cities from urban heat droughts and the bad air quality, because in this valley, all the bad air is, it stays there for a long time and can go anywhere. And at the same time, the people are evenly hit when it floods and rains really hard. So that's quite a big problem. And the other thing is the impact of the air quality is worse in areas that are close to the sources, which makes sense, but it affects people in areas with less vegetation also the most. So what happens is that people that are in vulnerable positions, they are, well, let me put it the other way around. If you're not so vulnerable, you're better off. So rich people have it easier. And that has got to do something with the fast growth since a couple of decades of the city, from like 1 million people or even less to more than 5 million people at the moment. And policies are not very consistent in this country, I must say. And that means that a lot of landscape and also hydrological pain has emerged over the years. So we did an analysis, what components of this landscape pain we can identify. I will do them very quickly. If you want to know more, we're almost ready with the report so that it becomes available freely for everyone. So if you want to have it afterwards, let me know, and I can make sure that you can get one as soon as we're ready, but it's very close to finishing. So landscape pain, almost, 1,330 hectares of quarries have been excavated from the mountains around the city. And buildings, constructions are built in natural reserves, like houses and other constructions. More than 3,500 more or less. And on the slopes of those mountains, you saw those pictures before. So that is actually for the mountains really painful. There's more than 670 kilometers of main roads that are bigger or broader and wider than 6 lanes. More than 1,000 hectares of surface parking. There is around 20 kilometers and expanding above ground metro system and 400 kilometers of very noisy rail tracks that are relatively unused. There is more than 1,000 buildings larger than 1,000 square meter and more than 7,500, between 2,500 and 10,000 square meter in surface, in area. So that, you know, is all causing quite a bit of landscape pain, as we call it. And the sources of air pollution, whether it's roads or industries or different sources, cause quite a lot of air pollution on a daily basis. People, like 2,500 people die earlier than they should actually, because they live in this climate. So I'm not sure whether I'll stay for a long time, but for my health is not good. For the rest is really nice here. So that's the difficult decision. When you count it all together, you see a map. We created this map of all the landscape pain in the city. And when you add it up, it's like really a painful situation. This is not the only pain. Also, hydrological pain is profound in this metropolitan area. We made an analysis of all the natural creeks that are disrupted by constructions, or they are just hidden, or sometimes people don't even know where they are. So they're just disappeared. More than 17,000 places in the metropolitan area have been overbuilt or disrupted by constructions. And that prohibits, natural hydrological systems to be, resilient. So the conclusion out of this is very simple. We need to have a landscape-based strategy, a green strategy, to improve the quality of life for the people and all non-human organisms in the city. So we developed a couple of scenarios, 4 scenarios, of which 2 are really urban, and we don't care. We just let it go. It will happen anyway, so why bother? That's the most extreme scenario, when you just leave it to urban development. And the other side of this is, can we reconquer parts of the city and regreen them? Can we create a healthy city based on the natural landscape that is still beneath the urban developments? And that's something that has not been impossible. In the 1960s, the regional government created this strategic plan for the metropolitan area, in which, at the left-hand side, you can see the metropolitan area of Monterrey, which is very similar to the well-known finger plan of Copenhagen. It's in its intent, it's very similar. However, over the years, this is a Google map of last year, you can see that in Copenhagen, still that system, that structure of green spaces entering deeply into the city is still there because of consistent policies, while in Monterrey that has been left to urban growth. So what should a green metropolis actually be? How can we plan for it at that regional scale? First of all, it needs to be based in the regional water system and can reconnect and also uncover and bring them back to the surface, all the urban creeks that have been overbuilt, in order to create an integrated system of waterways that are connected throughout the urban region. And when we know this, we can reconnect these corridors ecologically, surround them with corridors that are broad and abundant, and create space for green, directly linked to the urban creek system. And then the spaces that are left over, let's say, we need to adapt the urban uses to those structures that are created at the higher level. But then that's not enough. I mean, we can say, well, we have a great regional strategy and nothing happens on the ground. So we need also to create interventions at the local and hyperlocal scale related to the hydro and ecological creek system, recovering them, recreating them as green and water spaces. We can integrate urban food systems and start creating food, local food, for the people that live around these places. We have been working on a project here that is adding to that system, thinking about what kind of traditional recipes are interesting and healthy for the people to start, eating those recipes again, and that those crops again that have been vanished out of our systems because of the processed foods that are coming from mainly the US and Western Europe. So all those unhealthy habits, we need to try to intervene in them again, try to reinventing those traditions, grow those ingredients, and work with the local chefs to create new dishes based on the old ones that are more healthy. So we started with identifying the plants that are now impossible to grow, not only because of climate change, but also because people think it's too elaborate to work with those plants and they're not feasible anymore. So we try to bring them back in a system that is really local, related to the local traditions like the urban milpas. The system of bringing together beans, squash, and maize, corn, in a system that benefits from each other. And we started the first experiments to fit those systems in really a small space, because then we can apply them later on in different spaces around the city. We have designed it, we have planted and created it. Since August, in 3 months' time, we had an abundant harvest, and we used that harvest. This is the harvest, some of it at least. This is the squash and the flowers of the squash. But we used that to work with the local chefs that, by coincidence, now are Michelin star chefs. I don't know how come, but probably they did a good job without us after all. But they start to reinvent those recipes and using our produce to work with that. So for this year, we have a plan to implement that in the most vulnerable places in the city. One of those neighborhoods, Independencia, is our new case study. It's quite a big area, around 30,000 people, and we will work with the local communities to integrate this type of urban agriculture in their daily lives, but also work again with the chefs to help the people to start cooking those more healthy menus. Another, and this is the last one that I want to share with you, is creating green islands and new greenways in the city and transforming mostly traffic lanes and abandoned public spaces and transform them into green spaces. We have started a program on integrating Miyawaki forests, like tiny forests, in those urban areas, and we have identified what kind of natural vegetation we need in this area, the regional area, to use in those little tiny forests. That's all theory, but we need to have a good site. We need to improve the soil for this, and of course, eventually we need to plant the tiny forest. So this was the first one on our own campus, planting a tiny forest together with a whole group of interested people. And what we will do is we will follow and monitor exactly how well the forest will be doing. So the estimated results are that there's more carbon capture, there will be new species around, the noise will be reduced, and also the air quality will be improved. And after 2.5 years, you don't need to really maintain this kind of types of forest. But we put in sensors in this forest and we start measuring real time. I can have it, everyone can see it on his phone. What is the temperature, what's the humidity, and how well is our forest doing? So that is, by the way, next week we do a second one. So it's very interesting to grow it as a sort of internet of trees or internet of nature, so we can connect the results and the well-being of our green spaces. Not only in Monterey, but it can be in potential, can be a worldwide system of forests. So a sort of conclusion, what can we do if we want to create a green metropolis? Start with the pain. What is exactly, what hurts in the city? What is painful for people? It can be really, environmental, it can be also visual. It can be, ugly landscapes. People don't care about those, so you need to make them more beautiful. Identify the pain first. Then you can repair that pain, but we think you need to go further than only heal the pain. and it's beyond repairing the problem. So we need to try to create solutions that, you know, we can fall in love with again. Use the landscape as a basis for this, because out of that landscape, you know, interventions, new interventions, quality, new qualities can emerge more simply, and people, you know, they love to be in a green and healthy landscapes because it's also healthy for themselves. To do that, we need to connect the regional and the local scale. I explained that in the presentation, I think, and not only think on the short term, but also think about long-term strategies and connect them to the local transformations in the city. So this was the sort of conclusion out of the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, just let me know after the other two presentations.
Right. Thank you very much, Rob, for a very insightful and exciting presentation with I think really interesting transformative projects that you've also presented in the process. If anybody has any questions or comments, please add it to the chat afterwards, and we'll take it up and discuss it afterwards. You're welcome to add it in the meantime while the other two speakers are presenting. Our next speaker for this seminar is Professor Stefan Nias from TU Delft in the Netherlands. Stefan, before I introduce you, can you just check can you share your presentation and then just check whether your mic is working? If that's already, then we'll commence. So we can see the screen.
Yes. Can you also hear me?
We can hear you. You can, at the moment I see many small pages, and if you'd like to choose one and present it, then we can just see that it's presenting.
Yes. Now to be in presenter mode.
Okay. Are you now in presenter mode?
I'm in presenter mode.
Okay. We're still seeing the slide deck at the moment.
And I try to do it in another way. Very strange.
In the meantime, thank you for those that are posting questions already. Appreciate it.
Is it now better?
No.
Oh.
See, I see a button saying present in Teams. I don't know whether that button could make a difference or help. It's at the top right of your screen. I am not sure if that might work, but it's.
So there's this option share. I work with Teams all the time, so it's like standard content only. Very strange. Let me see if this works now. Still not working?
No, we're still seeing the slide deck.
And now?
No, it's still. Okay. I assume you've used the share at the within the Teams platform, and then from there share screen, or I mean just as another option maybe that.
Yeah, I use the top right share option, and then I select my presentation, which is on. Is it now better?
Yes, that's perfect. Now we can see it. Okay, brilliant. Right. Thank you very much. Good. So let me just introduce Professor Stefan Nias. Professor Stefan Nias is a full professor of landscape-based urbanism and the head of the section Landscape Architecture at Delft University of Technology at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment in the Netherlands. He's an internationally experienced academic, designer, project leader, and author of award-winning publications. By training, he's a landscape architect and a gardener, and his work focuses on landscape-based urbanism, utilizing the understanding of the landscape system and its social, cultural, and ecological processes, the landscape logic, as the basis for sustainable urban planning and design. The core of this approach consists of designing with nature, people, and history. Stefan, we're really looking forward to your presentation, and you can continue.
Well, thank you very much for this kind invitation and introduction. So, my 15-minute presentation will be about cultivating urban regions through design. And that is actually elaborating on an approach we have been working on in the past 15 years. And it's not only a theoretical exercise, but we also applied this approach in several regions in the world. And some of them are still ongoing. Yeah, already, and I think also the content is quite in line with what Rob was presenting already, but maybe with some different accents to it. And actually here I show you a picture of the projected urbanization in the upcoming years up to 2050. And then it's estimated that about 70% of the world population will live in the urban areas. And actually, the most pressing issue with that is that the urban footprints will grow faster than the urban population itself. It will increase factor 2 to almost 4 times. So that means that cities will encroach into vulnerable nature reserves and into areas where we rely on for food production and for fresh water and biodiversity. So therefore, we think it's very important to develop approaches in which the landscape takes the basis for urban development. And therefore, I think this wedding cake model provides a very interesting view to that, because in a way, what it expresses is that we should take the biosphere and the water as the basis for societal development, and that is the basis for economic development. And that's actually right in the other order as it goes nowadays, where often economy is taken as the basis to shape our society, and then of course also shape the biosphere at cost of the many challenges as we see around us. So therefore we strongly believe that nature and landscape should be taken as the basis for these developments. But that also requires a different way of working, of understanding, especially regarding the relationship between research and design, because we can really well understand how certain systems function, how certain phenomena are working, but then the question is, how can we make them operational for the future? So therefore, we think also the connection between spatial design and research is really at the basis of this approach. And as you know, academia, but also society is often organized in sectors and silos. So how to break down these silos and how to work in a cross-disciplinary way. That's also like the question underlying this issue. Of course, it's not only about the ecological aspects, it's also about the social cultural aspects. So it's about the dialogue, the interaction between these two elements. And as mentioned by Rob, it is also very important to have this long-term perspective and then to reason backwards on short-term transformative projects. Where can we start tomorrow in order to make a change? And as you know, we live in a world where we lead on a certain short-term disease. So everything needs to be solved, and it needs to be solved tomorrow. Also, political terms are often like 5 years in the Netherlands at least, and I think also across the globe there will be similar terms. So actually, when things happen, it's usually within this term. And then we forget to put things into the perspective of the long term. So this is also very important when we really want to make a change, that we combine these two dynamics, you can say. It's also about combining different scale levels, working throughout the scales. So from the region to the backyard and everything in between. So it's really about thinking big in terms of scale, but also in terms of ideas. And then indeed to act local. And therefore, we also need this transdisciplinary approach in which not only different disciplines work together, so designerly disciplines, but also the sciences and the professionals, but also other stakeholders like the people living in the area, the government people, etc., etc. So in a way, this kind of landscape approach entails many dimensions which require transformation. And in the end, it is a contextual approach where design with nature, people, and history is at the core of designing better urban landscape futures. And as mentioned by Rob already, it is not only to design or to build a better future for humans, but also for the other species with whom we share this planet with. And therefore, we think that landscape-based regional design as an approach, or landscape-based urbanism, is it's also like part of the assignment I had to develop at this university. It's really about to develop this inter- and transdisciplinary design approach that uses the understanding of the landscape system, landscape logic, as the basis for sustainable urban landscape development. And that means that landscape is also like a design approach. So it's not a kind of blueprint planning approach in which everything is determined right from the start, but it is about creating a robust landscape frameworks which allow adaptation to local circumstances. And therefore also the idea of adaptive design principles is so important. Principles which allow to do similar things, to meet similar objectives, but to adapt to a local context. And therefore, in the past 10 years, we have been working on a certain procedure which circles around three key elements. So where design and research go hand in hand, it is a transdisciplinary approach, and visualization is really at the core of what we do. So that means that, let's say, the process of going through a diagnosis to strategy to design exploration to action perspective is a co-creative process where people sit on the table and think together, exchange information and knowledge, and build ideas together. And I don't have the time to elaborate each of these stages, but indeed, it is really about this co-creative processes. And of course, we talk a lot about it in the theory, but also in practice, we need to apply this approach where we not only appropriate a kind of participatory approach in which we already have an idea and then try to persuade people to do it like how we do it in a kind of smart communication ways. But it is really about co-creating knowledge together, which also means that you have a proper trust base and that you spend time and really have this kind of exchanges in which you build an understanding on how a certain site functions in its system and what really is needed to address the issues, maybe the landscape pain as mentioned before, but also the challenges and opportunities. So what can we do with it? And usually when you sit as equals on the tables, you can learn so much from each other, but also to find such fantastic, innovative ideas that you really can make a change. Also, visual means, as mentioned, are very important. So put a map on the table and you get a kind of useful conversation on what you really mean. Because when you don't make things concrete, like spatial, putting a line on the map or making a small sketch, then usually we stick to abstract notions and we think then that we know what the other person means, but actually in reality it's something completely different. But when we put things on the map, then we really start to understand what the other person means and start to develop ideas. And usually we come then to the conclusion that we have for 80% similar objectives and possibilities, and for 20% complementary ideas and and possibilities. So in that regard, mapping and exploring possibilities through design is very important. And what you see on the screen is maybe a little bit ugly map, but it is a result of an intensive interaction between the government, project developers, local people, ecologists, water specialists, to develop the Pearl River Delta in China, where we have been working on for 5 years to develop a strategic vision, and later translating it into, how to say, strategic projects where indeed water and ecology was really the formative power for urban development. And of course, it's also about making use of the technologies available. So also in that project, we developed some hands-on tools which can help you in order to understand and to support the decisions made by GIS systems, but also by very intuitive three-dimensional drawing tools where you can, let's say, make a scan of a model and put it into a digital environment in order to model and to simulate certain elements regarding urban climate, for instance, or how the water flows go. So it's also really about enabling technologies and making use of that. And of course, it's not only about technology, it's also about pen and paper, as mentioned before. It's like using all of these thinking instruments to come up with new ideas. So, and then of course, it's also about systemic understanding of how the landscape actually functions throughout the scales. So understanding landscape logic can be done by, of course, decomposing the landscape in different layers of development, for instance. So in Delft, we have been developing a kind of layered approach, which decomposes an urban region into layers, which we call the different conditions for urban development. So the substratum, like soil, water, relief, but also climate, are regarded as the first tier conditions. And then, of course, also transportation networks, whether it is about car, train, but also about more sustainable forms of transportation, are forming the conditions for urban development. And when you decompose an urban region in such a way, then you also see the relationships and the non-relationships in that system. And then you can start to try understand and how to work with that. And therefore, it's also very important to understand multi-scale relationships and dependencies. And therefore, we also developed an approach in which different scale levels are regarded as to be interdependent from each other, but also provides a way to understand their relationships. And then it starts by when you have to develop an urban site, or you have to work in a certain region, you need to understand where it is positioned in the natural system. With regards to water, you have this very clear division in the upstream zone, middle stream zones, and downstream zones, with each of their own ecologies, with their own possibilities for further spatial development. And when you don't know in what part of the system you are, how can you ever work with that? So, for instance, when you want to solve flooding issues in the down part of the delta and the downstream, usually it means that you also have to start in the upstream part of the watershed in order to increase the sponge capacity, for instance. And in the middle stream, you also need to provide space to store water. And these are only like a couple of examples, but you do understand that the provision in the system is providing the conditions for what you can do and cannot do. So therefore, this kind of sections where you show the relationship between certain natural processes and cultural activation and cultural interaction is mapped out is of crucial importance, because it gives you clues and possibilities for further development in order to regenerate certain ecological systems, for instance, or how to make a climate adaptive watershed. And then in the end, it needs to be translated into the local use. So in this case, you see an urban street, which was a traffic artery, which is translated into a climate adaptive green zone, social infrastructure, you can say, where ecological features are implemented, as well as water storage. And the beautiful thing about this is that it is also connected to the bigger landscape structures, as mentioned before, because this was like in a former brook valley, where the water was carried in a natural way. So also in this regard, we can also work through the scales and make these connections when you have this proper understanding on how the system actually functions. Of course, then you can say, when you have this kind of understanding, how are you going about to design? And therefore, we think, or I think, design with nature is, of course, one of the most important pillars, which means that you take the functioning and processes of nature as the foundation for planning and design. And that also entails that abiotic factors such as climate, elevation, soil, and water determine urban development opportunities. And here you see a beautiful picture of a neighborhood which was recently developed in the Netherlands, where the landscape really was taken as the basis for urban development. So it was not considered to be a tabula rasa, a clean sheet, you can say, in which new urban developments could take place. But here the designers and the project developers and the local communities and the policymakers were really looking into the systems of this landscape and how it can become the basis for social inclusive developments. Because the houses you see here is not only for the happy few, the people who can afford it, but there's also social program. So it is really a kind of generous, spatial green environment for everyone. And then the question is, how can we do this? So therefore, we are also engaging into some research programs in order to find out what kind of business models are behind this kind of developments, in order to make it also financial feasible. Design with nature also entails ecosystems restoration, management, and rehabilitation as formative powers, as you can see here in the riparian zones in Rotterdam, where this civil engineering profiles are replaced by tidal zones, where different ecological habitats can develop, and where people also can experience the tides. And where it was more like a technical solution in the past, it's now also what we call this more climate adaptive, ecological, transition zones. Thinking about ecology, we also have to think about urban habitats and novel ecosystems. So when we build our urban tissue in such a way that it can also provide new habitats, new ecosystems will thrive. Like here you see this fox, which is actually typically not an urban species, but when we create the right conditions, we can make it like that. So a second pillar is design for people, which means that we design inclusive public spaces on a human scale. So it's not only about creating green spaces as such, but also creating green spaces which is attractive to people, and maybe sometimes even places where people cannot come. So it's really about having this more particular and refined idea on how we can design for people. And there's some beautiful guidelines we can make use of. And I'm sure you know this 300 guideline developed by Cecile Konijnendijk, which states that actually based on proper scientific research, piles of research, that when people see trees from their home every day, that their health, mental and physical health will increase. So that we need 30% tree canopy cover, not only for ecological purposes, but also for for heat stress mitigation, for instance, or that we need to have like green spaces, proper sized green spaces on walking distance. So all of these rules will help us to enable to create urban environments which are social and ecological inclusive, and really are focused not only on natural development, but also on making places where people can thrive. As mentioned before, climate adaptive public spaces are of course very nice examples of how you can do that, but also that we can regard public spaces as social infrastructure where people can meet and interact, getting to know each other, build communities, etc. It's also about designing with history, making use of cultural historical landscape structures and elements. And here you see, for instance, an example we worked on in the eastern part of the Netherlands, where we reactivated historical water systems in order to increase the sponge capacity to combat drought and stimulate biodiversity development. And at the same time, making people aware of the rich historical cultural history in that area. It also learns from vernacular practices and making use of indigenous and traditional ecological knowledges. For instance, reinstating water meadows as a social practice, where a couple of times per year people meet in order to recharge the groundwater and at the same time build strong communities. Or, for instance, what we can learn from fantastic examples of circular agriculture, like here displayed, the Dai Pond system in Hangzhou, one of the most circular agricultural systems in the world. So then the question is, what can we learn from it? What are the principles behind, and how can we apply this in a contemporary situation in order to create a landscape-based regional design, this long-term perspective, you can say, which guides urban development and at the same time helps to allocate strategic projects. Here you see, for instance, one of the pilot projects we are working on in the Chinese Pearl River Delta, where this urban development is really based on this long-term strategy and at the same time also creating this more green, inclusive, ecological, water sensitive urban environments, and at the same time also creating high densities in which engineering and landscape are combined in systemic landscape design. It's also about creating robust landscape frameworks which guide urban development and at the same time also safeguard certain ecological and historical features and making it accessible for people for recreation. It's also about creating landscape-based strategies, as mentioned before, for instance, to prioritize urban landscapes, but also to reconstruct landscapes, such as here in Utrecht, where also an urban highway was replaced by its historical waterways and green structures again. Or here, where also parts of the landscape were incorporated into smart urban district development, which is also focused on walkability and where smart solutions for car parking were developed. Or here, creating novel urban environments, superimposing landscapes on historical ones in order to create new environments. And I can tell you this area is really highly appreciated by the people living there, but also from a biodiversity point of view and from a recreational point of view, this area increased dramatically in terms of values. And in the end, it is also about landscape-based solutions. So how can we, for instance, use traditional water management in relation to climate adaptation, biodiversity, CO2 reduction, and urban green structures? So now we work on a project in the eastern part of the Netherlands where we need to develop 10,000 of houses, but how to make the landscape a guiding element and this historical features as a guiding element in there. So to wrap up, So when you really want to make a change and take the landscape as the basis, then the use of landscape logic, understanding the landscape structure and systemic relationships throughout the scales are key in order to design with nature, people, and history, and therefore also try to identify and work with adaptive design principles. Also, this joint learning and developing solution with owners, authorities, and knowledge institutions is so important. So it's not only that planners or academics or the local people only know the solution. It's usually the interaction which come up with innovative solutions. And therefore, we should also not stick only to plans, but also to have an action perspective in which strategic projects and experimenting is so important. Initiate pilot projects to see how things really function and what is really needed to get them going. So if you want to read a little bit more about these backgrounds and maybe some of the projects, it's maybe worthwhile to scan the QR code and to download this booklet, which is also freely downloadable, but of course also available in bookstores. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to some engaging questions and remarks.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for a really exciting presentation, and you've managed to unpack it in such a structured way. And I do appreciate the comment at the end saying that it's also about planning for action and what those pilot projects can be in the end, and one can certainly see it in the work. For our last speaker for today, we've got Professor Carina Landman. And Carina, if you can just check your, let's just see if you can share your presentation again.
Sorry, was it window or screen that I had to press?
I think screen.
Screen, okay.
Let's see.
Okay. Can you see?
Yes, we can see.
Okay.
It. Perfect. Great. Good. So our final speaker for today. Now I can't see it anymore. Carina, I think you'll have to stick to that screen.
Okay.
Don't worry, there won't be any questions or.
Okay, sorry, stop sharing. I don't know what I pressed. Let me try again. I'm sorry for that.
No, it's no problem.
Okay, all right. There we go.
Good. Okay. Yes. Great. So our final speaker for today, Professor Carina Landman, is a professor in urban planning with a background in urban design and architecture. Her research focuses on spatial transformation, including research on gated communities and safer and sustainable neighbourhoods, regenerative and resilient cities and public space. And the work on public space revolves around issues of inclusivity, regeneration, resilience, and decolonisation. The research on sustainable development focuses on urban resilience and regenerative development and design. And she published a book, Evolving Public Space in South Africa in 2019, and is currently the principal investigator of a National Research Foundation project on regenerative public space in South Africa. She's also co-editing a book entitled Decolonisation of the Built Environment. Carina has edited multiple special editions. She's also published really widely on a number of themes, and we are really looking forward to her presentation on the work of the Regenerative Public Spaces project. Thank you very much, Carina. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, everyone. And good afternoon. It is a great privilege to speak to everyone this afternoon, and also following on from two really great presentations. Thanks to our previous speakers for setting the larger context and also highlighting the importance of working at multiple scales, working together, recognizing the interdependence terms of things that happen at the different scales. So I think that sets a really nice basis for what I would like to share today, and that is the story of a project that we've been working on, regenerative public space. So let me just see if my screen is not going forward. Oh, there it is. Okay, so this what I'm going to share with you is about our project Regenerative Public Space. It is focused on transdisciplinary cooperation. This was also highlighted as a necessity by the previous speaker. We wanted to find out what would such a process entail, and also develop a digital platform to assist this. So we worked with a wonderful project team and also with 4 different communities, and you can just see 2 of the groups there. So also working together with multiple stakeholders, as was highlighted before. So we saw public spaces not only as parks, but also as any space that is accessible and owned by a public institution or co-created by people, and saw regenerative public space as this catalyst to create positive change in the larger urban environment. And it's really important because this can become then that ripple that goes far beyond the public space to have an impact on the larger environment, but also, as was highlighted in the previous 2 presentations, to work with the bigger systems, whether it's the water system or the whatever at that regional scale, to acknowledge that and work with that at the same time. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to very briefly share with you our thinking, the paradigm, and also the process, and then just very briefly share something about the projects. So we all know what is regenerative sustainability, working with the socio-ecological system to create life-enhancing conditions for the global community of life. And having looked at these various projects, we came up with 5 essential principles. So the first one really relates to the essence of place. And that would ensure that interventions are specific and that they would fit into the environment. Again, working with that bigger system, but not only the ecological system, but also the social system. Mention was also made about history and culture in the 2 presentations. So understanding that and working with that is really important for the essence of place to emerge in those specific places and through their interventions. Evolutionary potential is really unlocking this latent energy or the capital that's there. It's inherent. So really, by understanding what is possible, this used to be a site that there was nothing on. It was just a vacant piece of open land. So seeing that potential and working with it to allow that evolution to occur in space. The value-adding role is also very important, working with the specific physical characteristics of the space, but also its distinctive patterns and relationships and its value in the broader environment. This specific space in Hatfield was also a vacant piece of land, very derelict, with homeless people and drug users frequenting the site before NGO, the University of Pretoria, and a lot of stakeholders came together to start thinking about how this space could be transformed. And later students got involved with different kinds of projects, engineering students, architecture students, landscape design students, and it started to create a small little paradise mecca in the middle of a very high density area. So really asking what is the value that the space can add in that broader environment. Also recognizing different leverage points that through various actions or through various ideas happening in a particular space, it can start, it can form a basis for things to happen. One of the areas we were working with, Burgers Park, they have a festival each year, and during that festival, it brings together a lot of communities to share various ideas, to talk about their park, to show how they want to go forward. And this is also our group asking people to let us know why they like the park and can they tell us something more about that. And then the last one is really to manage the hard lines. And those are the non-negotiables. So having a flexible approach on the one hand to allow for evolution to occur, to allow for adaptation to occur, but keeping those things in place, that is really, really important, and that is a no-go area. For example, not trying to have it fall into disrepair where drug users come back and start to scare off other people that want to use the space as well. So it's really about doing what is essential to meet and to support the original objective. The process is really about people, the previous two presenters also talked about co-creation. So it's really about this ongoing process where it's everybody working together to try and take that vision to the next phase, which is really about starting to intervene to facilitate the transformation. And we found that that happens through reconnection, revitalization, and reinvigoration. So the first phase is all about connecting people to the specific space, to the needs of the space, but also to understand the difficulties in the space, both the ecological challenges or potential, but also the social challenges and potential. For example, this is one of the areas in informal settlement where there was a real need to address the needs of the youth, a place where they can come together, where they could study, where they could develop, and so on. So from that vision to then create the basis to go forward. And things that could help, questions that could help is things like what is distinctive about this place? Are there special trees, vegetation, structures, places? What is distinctive about the people? Because this is also part of the capital that needs to be improved. The history, the memories, the skills that everybody can bring to this area, whether it's knowledge about plants or knowledge about, say, working with youth development or whatever. And then what is the value adding role in the public space, and also the higher potential of the public space for all people to get involved. And then there's a whole list of questions that one can ask, identifying the core stakeholders and who should be involved in this process. The second part is really about revitalization, turning the vision into reality where different stakeholders work together to identify, design and co-create physical and other interventions to improve both the ecological and the cultural systems. So there one can see again how beautiful that space was transformed over the years, both in terms of the ecological systems, the vegetation, fruit trees, vegetables, indigenous plants, but then also other structures like places to sit, walkways, paths, and so on. And again, there are some facilitating questions. What can be or has been done to enable the space to realize its potential, and how can different interventions work together in a systems approach? And it's really to make sure that the core team can involve everybody else that needs to be part of this. And the last phase is ongoing care of the public space to allow that continuous evolution, because often there is this thing that architects and urban designers go in, they help transform the space, and then after a while, there's nothing left. We worked on a project in a former marginalized area in the north of Pretoria, and after coming back in 2 years, there was nothing left. But this space is very different. The community keeps on organizing events to raise funds, to keep on maintaining the space, but also to keep the local people involved. So it's really to ensure that continuous evolution to keep it flourishing over time. And some facilitating questions would be who has or will ensure that there's ongoing care. So it's all about partnerships, community groups, and so on. And then also ensuring that there are resources to continue that, because especially in South Africa, in the context that we are working with, local municipality that does not have funds to help looking after most of the public spaces. So it really needs careful thinking about how to ensure ongoing maintenance. So it really is involving the core team and wider stakeholder network to ensure the ongoing management, maintenance and care of the public space. And this whole process is summarized in this diagram here. So it's really about co-conceptualization and collaboration, and there are many tools that one can use to connect, to identify that story of place through storytelling, mapping, surveys, and really to establish that base or that vision to go forward. To then co-create and for everybody to take part through small community workshops, focus groups, design charrettes or whatever, and then finally making sure that the energy that was built during this process can be sustained and can be spread to have a wider value. And an ongoing evolution, and that the project does not just stop there. So all of this learning obviously came from looking at what was happening internationally, but specifically looking at these 4 spaces in South Africa, because co-evolution among humans and natural systems can only be undertaken in those very specific places. So although there are these bigger principles that we can learn from, everyone must be specifically fitted to the situation, the story of that specific place. And then it happens together when people come together in that space. So these were the 4 communities or the parks that we worked on. A park in a high density inner city area, the revitalized area in Hatfield close to the university, a community garden, a small little neighborhood park, and then an informal settlement, the center with a space around it developed for the youth to allow them to further develop in that area. And then following from that, there was a number of lessons that the project team identified, and it's really about the people coming together, and what one can learn from their actions, and how their energy and their skills can make a difference. For example, here in the Mido Center, in the informal settlement, allowing these opportunities for the youth to develop. And this also relates to the second one, which is really about the potential And if that vision directly speaks to that specific place, then that is where the story of that place will then highlight the potential that comes out of there. Another key thing was that doesn't matter how small the action is, it's very important to take that action. Whether it's a few stakeholders that come together to raise funds to make a difference, whether it's a community group here to go and ask for donations to build a center, it is really important to start small. And then as soon as one are able to tap into that potential, then the chance for this to ripple and to get more people to contribute will grow. And then finally, local problems need local solutions. This was also mentioned in the previous presentation that although there are generic things that one can learn from, the interventions, although they may be based on similar principles, the specific interventions will have to be tailor-made for that specific place. So in conclusion then, regenerative places enables communities to heal and thrive. In Mojakebedi, as it was originally started as a place where people that were dependent on drugs could start to be rehabilitated and to can also contribute to the broader community in terms of the space, but also to start things like gardening. That's not just for them, but also for everybody around. And over time, it could develop in a space like this. So it's about healing to finally move towards a place where the specific place can thrive, both socially and ecologically. Regenerative thinking also allows people and places to connect, revitalize, and reinvigorate themselves in terms of where they live, work, and play. And then finally, regenerative public spaces have the potential to become active pulse points to allow these ripple effects in the broader areas to resonate, to go out and to work with a broader system to create greater regeneration far beyond this particular space. So finally then, if you want to learn more about the project and also get more information about the different case study areas, you're welcome to visit the platform. As I said, the idea of the project was to find out how can one assist the process, what could a potential method be to share, but most of all to create a platform where information can be shared, where people can register and become part of this community to share the knowledge. So yes, please have a look if you're more interested. Thank you very much.
Karina, thank you very much for your presentation. Well, you planned it a little bit like this, but I do enjoy the fact that you've ended up with a number of projects where we see it happening on the ground in very different ways. And it was, I think, really interesting to see those case studies. This brings us to the end of the third presentation, and I'm going to open the platform now for some comments and questions, and thank you for the questions we've received so far. There are a number already, but you're welcome to add more, and we'll see whether we can get through many of them. I think it was really interesting that we've touched on a much larger regional approach from Rob, which identifies the concerns, but then clearly brings in the concern about getting to smaller scale local problems, and I think that was and solutions for that. And similarly, I think from the work with Stefan, we see the importance of understanding the systems that we work within, the landscape itself, and it really challenges how how many of us are taught and how we think about our cities. And clearly, there should be a different approach of reading that. And then once you get that large understanding, then one can get back to the detail about how that gets solved. And ultimately, in all three, the importance of co-design coming to the fore, and how one could actually in the end find solutions. So thank you for that. We're going to start with the first question, and Menno Lammers asked, the first question was, how do you finance regenerative projects in a city? How do you overcome the investor barriers? I think that's a great question. I think it was after Rob's presentation, but if the other speakers have comments to that as well, because I think that's a challenge that we're all probably experiencing. But let's start with Rob.
Yes, well, I mean, finance is always seen as a sort of hindrance to things, and I kind of think that it also prevents us from doing things. I mean, but we don't have any money, so we don't do anything. My experience is that if you start with something, then the money will then come, instead of waiting for the money to come and then start something. So some of the examples that I showed, very local examples, are extremely cheap, and we use them as a sort of starting point, igniting follow-ups and processes. So the difficulty is, or I think if you try to get a lot of money from a government or from even a research grant, or the chance that you get it is not extremely high generally, and it paralyzes sometimes to do things. And I think we need to kind of turn that around and don't make money the problem, but tackle the problem, and then it's not automatically that it comes. Just open a bank account and the money come in. But if you show good examples and you start with something that is relatively cheap, the forest that I showed is not even 10,000 pesos, which is $500. So it is, almost anyone can have that amount of money. So I think turn it around, and then the money will come easier. And don't wait for the government to pay anything.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I see, Stefan, you've got a comment there as well.
Yeah, I think Rob is perfectly right, and I think it also ties into one of the questions posed to me about this. Let's say there's new business models. So what I strongly believe is this kind of two-way approach. On the one hand, just start a pilot project and then to see what happens, what you can learn from it, and then also the benefits of it. So you see really the value of it, and then you also have some evidence in order to show what the added value of such an approach is, not only from a community point of view, an ecological point of view, and maybe water management point of view, but also what kind of hindrance you perceive from policies, for instance, or financing models. So that's, I think, a very important approach. Just start small, like Professor Landman was referring to, because we also know that when you start too big, it often fails. So that's number one. Number two is, I think, when we frame budgets in a different way, like some project developers actually start doing, that's also what we are studying now, is that green is also not like a kind of open end. It's like almost no post on the budget, but that it should become part of the budget, because it also adds tremendous value to the things you do. Because also, calculation models should be changed in that regard. And I think some of the project developers are doing that already. Because they know when we have a high quality green environment, which is climate adaptive, heat stress mitigation, ecology rich, etc., adds to the value of the houses. Real estate prices rise in the future. So in that regard, it's also like a good investment in that regard. Also, what we, and that's point number 3, is that when you think in landscape logic ways, that you can already earn money on the short term with, for instance, the preparation of new building sites. So in China, we came to the conclusion when you follow the logic of the land, in some places you could even build higher and earn money with that, and therefore also free space up for green and water, and also to create high quality human scale places. So I think these are very important elements which take sometimes time and courage, but when you do it, you really can make a change. It's also about a different mindset. And I think and that's the last point I want to make, we have so much evidence that when you work, let's say, in this kind of ecological and social inclusive way, it adds value in many ways. So it's not only qualitative, but also quantitative, and you will earn money with it and save money with it. So in that regard, it is only also a kind of, bias we have, that we don't dare to mention these stuff in the budgets we create. And we know from experience that when you do that, things can make a change, and that people also even can start earning money with it or having a decent income.
Karina, I don't know if you have a comment on that. Otherwise, I've got a question related to this, but maybe you've got a comment. Or, I'm reflecting on your focus on public spaces, which seems to have been, one could argue, possibly cheaper to develop. Is there something in there that one could think about in terms of the cost involved and whether the regenerative processes can enable it to be more cost effective? I don't know. Might be a simple question to ask.
Yeah, I think one will need to do. I mean, these are just 4 cases, and obviously one cannot generalize from just 4 cases. I think one needs to have many more. But one thing that I think we learned is that, I mean, as Rob said in the beginning, we don't need so much to get started. We need a lot of energy from people. We need people that are willing to invest their skills to start things, and then it seems that other people will get interested and they will start to donate or also give funding or help or become involved, and so on. So I think the lesson from that is that often that just to get the thing started is really important, to get that energy going, to highlight the potential so that people can then so that you can then start to attract others that might be interesting, extra investment, get more funding, and so on. So yeah, we focused on very, very small projects, but I think one can, once that ripples, it could have added benefits, working then on a precinct level and higher up as well. So I think funding can come from different sources and working at different scales.
Thank you. I think that's important to remember for all of us. I've got a second question which Marita posted, and again I think it could be relevant. We could start. I think it was still Robert. We can start with you and then move through. What support do you get from city management if you have this different approach to reading the city and then working through that?
It's a very general question, I guess, and in my opinion, it's not only the government or city management. It's the whole a network of stakeholders that we need to take into account. So sometimes you get support from businesses or from NGOs or others that kind of force the government to step in. Or in other cases, it is just a private initiative that is starting the process. So it's in our case, we have support within the metropolitan area has got 18 different municipalities. And we have got support from like 2 or 3 of them. So, and I think that is really valuable already. But we've tried to connect that with the, foundation, with private companies, with academia. So we try to create a team or a group of stakeholders that work together on these kind of principles. It also, I think, depends on the sense of urgency of the government or other stakeholders in your region. If there are riots around water at a certain moment in the city, like it was 3 years ago in Monterrey, the government will think, oh, we need to do something about it. So that sense of urgency, another year of drought, and something starts to happen. So then a lot of stakeholders, not only city government, but a lot of stakeholders come into action. And my experience in Mexico at the moment is that as soon as people see the problem, they are also interested in kind of ways to solve it. So the awareness, raising awareness with a project like I showed today is important to start that process of thinking and also commitment to change in the future.
Thank you. Yes, and I understand that using the overall understanding of the crisis in a place or a city is certainly critical. The next question I have here is a question for Stefan from Hernes, who asks, what strategies do you suggest to get community engagement and to maintain newly created green spaces? Which I think is important, obviously, as part of your approach. But how do you get the community involved?
Yeah, I think when you co-create these spaces and you have developed these areas together with them, of course, they have also a sense of, ownership to it. So then they also want to maintain it for the longer future. So in that regard, it's about involving them right from the start. And also, it's not only on the neighborhood scale, by the way. Also, for instance, I refer to this regional park structures in Germany. We had this fantastic example of, for instance, a village wanted to have like a rose park, which was referring to their rich historical past. And actually, the mayor insisted to have that. So now there's this kind of rose park, which is part of the bigger park structure where people can just enjoy this rose park. But also at the same time, they take care of it and they make sure that it is maintained locally. And also from the social perspective, nobody dares to destroy something like vandalism or whatever, because they know that people love these spaces. So I think throughout the scales, it works like the same. So when you can activate this sense of ownership, people will take care of their environment. For instance, one last example, like this urban project I showed, which was like this landscape-based urban development. Also, the people in the area, they also take care of it. They manage the area. So lawyers work together with people, elderly people, in order to maintain the forest with help of, the nature conservation society. So in that regard, you see it on all kinds of levels. So the question is, do you provide them this sense of ownership? Do you make them part of the process? Or are you stepping up front and saying, I am the design, I'm going to decide what needs to be done? Or do you give suggestions and guide certain choices? and provide them the means they need in order to do it. And that's, I think, a big change. And I think very important in that regard is also that you need time. Time to build trust, but also time to get to learn where it is really about. And usually in real-time project, at least in Western Europe, we don't have time because we need to develop it as fast as possible. So we have something like a participatory process, but not real. And then you get, let's say, okay, yeah, the government decides this people will take care of their environment because it's not theirs.
Yeah, I think it's obviously it's this taking time and the slower process of engaging people and improving that people-place relationship is certainly
get to know each other. That's very important.
I think we've got 2 more minutes, and then we actually do need to get to the end of this. So I'm trying to get one more question for Karina, and then so thank you for all the comments and questions that everybody has shared so far. And then I do want to give a last minute for Jeremy to close for us. There was a question here which I think was really interesting. A question asking Karina, how do you tackle the biggest barrier in creating regenerative public spaces? Is there something that you've learned from that project that could help us think about that?
Sure. I think the biggest barrier is coming back to where the conversation started, is that people think you need somebody else to come and solve the problem. In South Africa, there's this notion, because government tends to struggle, because there is fewer resources to go around, to share, to maintain public spaces, to initiate them. It's almost this kind of thing as, we shouldn't bother to start because why? It's not getting us anywhere. So I think the biggest thing that I learned from this and from this wonderful, fascinating process was that you don't have to wait for others to come. If there are enough people to bring the energy, to define a vision, to see the potential, they can start the process, and then the rest will happen if you allow it to happen. So I think the barrier is often a mindset barrier. And if we change that, Krishna always talks about design for hope. If we change that to believe that there is hope if enough people come together. And I do realize that it is easier on a small space than it's necessarily on a larger regional scale, where it will take a lot more time to get everybody involved. But small little bits can become a big intervention on a larger scale. So for me, to tackle that mindset barrier would be the first step.
Good, thank you. Yes, I think it's so important to think about how our paradigms and how we think about our own action, our own role in the process. Karina and Stefan and Rob, thank you very much for the presentations. I'm going to hand over to Jeremy to just conclude for us, and then we'll be at the end of the seminar. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, everyone, for the fantastic presentations, a fantastic set of questions. We haven't got through them, which always shows that they're very provocative and interesting presentations. So that's a very good sign. What I'd like to finish off on is really to pick up on what Karina finished off on, which is to say, if you have an idea, if there's something you're interested in, if you've started exploring something, take it forward. And that is very much part of the idea of these SASB seminars. Between Jan and I and the CIB, there's a huge network of people. So if you're particularly interested in an area and have done a little bit of work and would like to put on a seminar, we can find other speakers. We can find other people to join you. And that's very much what we want this to become, is really a place where people share different ideas, make connections, and build change. I think part of what the presentations have been about is really making a start and exploring things from wherever you're starting from. And so that we can build momentum, we can build connections, we can build research over time. So that's my plea, and Jan is available, very keen to set up new SASB seminars throughout the year, and so am I. And we've got a lot of opportunities, I think, to set up a very interesting program. So thanks Jan, but I think particularly to Jan for all the work that he's put in to make this happen. Thanks, Jan. You're on mute.
Great. Thank you. It's such a pleasure. Thank you for all the speakers for presenting, and for everybody that attended. For those that are in South Africa or on this side of the world, have a lovely evening. And for those that are on the other side of the world, like Rob, good luck with the rest of the day. I hope it's a very successful day in the end. Thank you all. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye all. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye, Rob. Bye-bye.
Bye, Stefan.
Bye.